Yo Nation, I have a personal question I need to ask you. And if you have enough courage, answer in the comments down below. How many of you are into handcuffs? No. Hold on a second. Get your mind out of the gutter. Not those type of handcuffs. I'm talking about fantasy football handcuffs. In this video, we're going to take a look at every single backfield in the NFL. We're going to talk about starters. We're going to talk about the handcuffs and potential sleepers and who should be drafted and ready to perform in fantasy football for 2024. We live in an age now where even the RB2 for NFL teams will get us plenty of fantasy points to be considered even a flex option every single week. So breaking down the running back depth chart for all NFL teams is absolutely something that we need to do. And today we're going to go through all 32 NFL teams. We're going to take a look at their depth chart and we're going to start identifying who needs to be drafted no matter what. Maybe somebody we should take a late round flyer on, a stash that we can keep on our bench, and those running backs that we don't even need to worry about right now. And don't forget, our 2024 fantasy football draft guide is already live and ready for you to be jumping into so you can start preparing for this season. And I want to give one away in this video. So let's say we get to 573 likes. If we get 573 likes on this video, I'm going to pick someone from the comment section to get a free fantasy football draft guide. And this thing is packed with information, and all of that content you have come to know, plus some more this year, is ready and right at your fingertips. But let's go ahead and kick it off by talking about the NFC East first. After not targeting running backs in free agency or the draft, Rico Dowdle truthers were feeling really good about his chances to be the starter this year. But then a familiar face has made a return, and Zeke Elliott is back with the Dallas Cowboys, ready to regain some of that magic that he had from a few years back. As of right now, for me, Zeke Elliott is not going to be a must own. I just don't know how much he has left in the tank at this point, and I don't know what kind of a split we'll see with the other running backs. A lot of that will be determined over the first few weeks of the season. As of right now, he's definitely somebody that I would spend a draft pick on, but really only as like my RB3, RB4 at best. Rico Dowdle would be his handcuff, and in deeper leagues, I'm absolutely looking at stashing him, even though he may not have any flex value as of right now. Or for those of you in Dynasty and Best Ball leagues that have larger rosters, that would be something that you could look at doing as well. And Deuce Vaughn may end up seeing an increased role this season as a pass catcher, but I don't know how much it may actually end up being. The New York Giants signed Devin Singletary to replace Saquon Barkley, and that's not a bad spot for Singletary to land. Now, if you take a look at the numbers, Singletary had his best season last year in terms of overall volume, but he had his worst season in terms of efficiency. So what does that add up to on a New York Giants offense that's not nearly as good as what the Houston Texans were last year? Tyrone Tracy is going to be a stash for me. I don't know if I'm going to draft him right away because I still believe Eric Gray is going to get a few touches potentially to begin the season. Tracy doesn't have a ton of draft capital backing up any type of move into the starting lineup right away, but it could end up happening at some point. So for those of you in deeper leagues or for those of you with deeper benches, definitely Tyrone Tracy is a guy that I would like to back up Devin Singletary with. We just talked about his old home, but his new home, the Philadelphia Eagles, is a great fit for Saquon Barkley. I got him inside the top 10 running backs, and there's really not a whole lot to say about that guy because he's clearly a must-own in any format or situation you find yourself. As far as for the backups in that lineup, though, I mean, obviously if Barkley were to miss any time, you'll probably want to move over to one of them, but I'm not interested in trying to pick up one of them as of right now because Barkley will see the majority of the running back touches anytime that he's actually on the field. Brian Robinson had a pretty decent season last year. Now, I also don't believe Washington was utilizing him correctly, but now Austin Eckler is in town, and both of these guys should probably be owned regardless of format. And right now I'm still pegging Brian Robinson Jr. as the starter in this offense. But maybe Austin Eckler ends up taking that job. Or maybe Austin Eckler does enough in the passing game to end up helping propel his status to at least some sort of a flex start every single week. All right, let's head up to the NFC North. And there's going to be a lot of marquee names that we need to talk about, starting with DeAndre Swift and his new home with the Chicago Bears. Now, his offensive line this coming season will not be as good as the offensive line he had last year. And even though they're much improved offensively overall at every position, it still doesn't meet what the Philadelphia Eagles had last year. So I think the ceiling we saw for DeAndre Swift is what we saw last season. That still makes him a must-own for me because there are going to be some times where he shows glimpses of really proficient running and puts up decent fantasy scores. But it also depends on his ADP. Khalil Herbert could end up being a handcuff that we should take a look at if we have DeAndre Swift. We know Swift is not an example of health in his NFL career so far, and if you own Swift and you have enough room, having Herbert may not hurt either. When we talk about the Detroit Lions, Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery are both must-own players. Jahmyr Gibbs right now has an ADP in the first round. David Montgomery is giving you a slightly better value, and maybe he doesn't put up the volume we saw last year in terms of yards on the ground, with Jahmyr Gibbs breaking out over the second half of last season, but touchdowns should still end up being there for him, and he should still give you respectable RB2 or flex numbers on a weekly basis. The upside will always be with Jahmyr Gibbs, but David Montgomery will have some good games as well. The Green Bay Packers have moved on from Aaron Jones, and they brought in Josh Jacobs in free agency, and this might be the best opportunity he has had for a big season since he entered the league, and he's had some pretty big years so far. He fits in nicely with this offense, and he's definitely a guy that probably is going to be drafted in the second round of most drafts. Now, if you want to stash Marshawn Lloyd behind him, you definitely could if you have a big enough roster. I'm probably not going to stash Marshawn Lloyd unless it's Dynasty or Best Ball. In redraft, I probably stay away for right now because I do believe A.J. Dillon will see some time on the field to begin the year, with Lloyd potentially taking some touches as the season goes on. I can guarantee Aaron Jones wants to show the Green Bay Packers that moving on from him was a massive mistake, but it doesn't make him a must-own with what we've seen injury-wise from him here as of recent. Am I going to draft him? Yeah, absolutely. If I can get him as like my RB3, that would be absolute perfect, because if you're missing him any given week, you didn't spend enough draft capital on him for it to hurt you, and you could easily replace him with somebody else in the flex spot. But any higher than that, I would be super uncomfortable with. As far as Ty Chandler goes, he showed some sparks at the end of last season, and he may have been a decent starter if it had not been for them bringing Aaron Jones in. It is a one-year deal for Jones, though, so at any point in time they're not happy with what he's doing, they could end up going to Ty Chandler instead. Let's head down south to maybe the worst division in all of football. I mean, I think a lot of people would be willing to argue that that statement is accurate there. And my hope is that this division is not as bad as Arthur Smith's play calling was last season, because it frustrated the crap out of Bijan Robinson fantasy owners. This year, though, I expect to see a lot more consistency in the way he's utilized. And then plus, with Kirk Cousins at the helm at quarterback now, it's definitely going to open up a lot more running lanes for Bijan Robinson. Tyler Algier last year absolutely saw a few touches and was a guy at the beginning of the year that looked like somebody with standalone fantasy value. I don't think that is going to happen. But for those of you with Bijan Robinson stares, stashing him could end up helping you out if Bijan has to miss any games. I'm leaning more towards not drafting him at all, but in best ball leagues, you absolutely should. It is really hard to tell what the Carolina depth chart is going to look like come week 1. And as of right now, I will give the nod to the veterans, with Chuba Hubbard being the main running back, Miles Sanders handcuffing him, and then the sleeper being Brooks at this point. But I think Jonathan Brooks is just as worthy of a draft spot as what Chuba Hubbard Hubbard is. And maybe Hubbard is going to be the starter to begin the year, but at some point, Brooks absolutely could end up taking over. These two guys at the top are not a part of the game plan of the new staff that is now in place in Carolina. And because of that, Brooks, who was drafted by this staff, could absolutely end up becoming the starter by any point. Even in redraft leagues, I would be willing to potentially give Brooks a shot over Chuba Hubbard, but we probably should target both of them just in case. Now, I wouldn't do it on the same team. Let me go ahead and give you that disclaimer right there. If you draft Chuba Hubbard, I'm probably not going to draft Jonathan Brooks. If you draft Jonathan Brooks, I'm definitely not drafting Chuba Hubbard. We need to try and figure out which one we like the most and make our shot on that one only to begin with. Alvin Kamara lost a step last season. Sure, tons of volume in the passing game, but efficiency-wise, did not look good at all. And maybe that was due to several factors. But moving forward, we got to be careful with what he does and does not do for our offense. Is he a top 3 running back still? No, I don't think he is, but he's still viable, especially in half PPR and full PPR formats. So we're still definitely going to be drafting him. But in terms of a handcuff, Kendre Miller would be the only guy I'm looking at over Jamal Williams. And even at that point, he's closer to being a non-drafted player than a stash. Rachaad White is going to be a must own. And you all know this already. Rachaad White and I have a love-hate, mostly hate relationship at this point. He's definitely going to lose some touches this year, though. Bucky Irving is going to see some work in the passing game. I guarantee that that is going to happen. We don't know how much it's going to be yet as of this point. I would definitely be backing up Rachaad White with Bucky Irving, though, later in your drafts, because there is an opportunity for Bucky Irving to find some sort of value in half PPR and full PPR leagues. The NFC West is loaded with must-have running backs, and James Conner in Arizona is definitely on my radar once again. He was great last season when he was healthy, and that's one of the reasons why I'll still draft him this year. But Trey Benson is going to be hot on his heels for a starting spot. James Conner just has to stay healthy. If he is, he's probably going to produce with an upgraded offense. But if he doesn't, if he gets hurt and Trey Benson gets any time whatsoever, James Conner could be quickly out of a job. Clearly, Christian McCaffrey is not only a must-have running back, but he's the RB1 for a lot of people out there. But after him, I'm not interested in drafting any other San Francisco running backs, just for the mere fact of we don't know who it's going to be. Everyone will just have to run to the waiver wire if McCaffrey misses any time. It could be Jordan Mason. It could end up being Elijah Mitchell. They drafted Isaac Guerendo. They have got some guys that are decent running backs behind him, but we just don't know which one would get the call if it's needed. Kenneth Walker had some fantastic numbers last season, and when you end up diving into how efficient he was, you'll end up finding a guy that could be on the cusp of a huge breakout. And everybody was worried about Zach Charbonnet last season, and he didn't end up really doing anything. So Zach Charbonnet really isn't a handcuff that you can play with Kenneth Walker. He would be a stash, though, in case you have Kenneth Walker, have a deeper bench, and want to hold on to him in case there is an injury. Best ball, deep benches, only way I'm drafting Charbonnet. For the LA Rams, Kyren Williams, absolutely a must own. Fantastic year last season. One of the breakout candidates and potentially a huge waiver wire addition for a lot of people. But Blake Corum fits this offense perfectly. Is Corum going to get a ton of touches if Kyren Williams is healthy? No, he won't. But there was some news that Kyren Williams is going to miss a significant portion of the rest of the offseason with a foot injury. How healthy will he be this year? How healthy will he be come week 1? Blake Corum could end up being a guy that could save a lot of seasons. The AFC East could end up seeing a bunch of really good running backs as well. And for James Cook, he is absolutely a guy that could take a step forward this season as long as he becomes a little bit more efficient. Now, they did draft a couple of guys behind him, but really for me, that's more about depth and maybe some help in the passing game than it is for giving him the touches on the ground. They lost some offensive weapons. James Cook's going to have to step up. The Miami Dolphins potentially hold 2 top 15 running backs, Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane. But how healthy will both of them be? Mostert, he's on the wrong side of 30 by quite a bit, coming off a career season. Devon Achane, he had some issues staying healthy last season. Is that a trend that we continue to see? Do we have to draft both of these guys? Absolutely, but we don't want to overdraft them. Ramondre Stevenson started off slow last season, but over the last few games of the year before he got hurt, his efficiency flew back up and he looked way better. Now with hopefully more solid quarterback play this season and some more help in that offense, we'll see Stevenson get back to what he was doing prior to that injury. For the New York Jets, it's Breece Hall or it's bust. I'm not really interested in the rookies Braylon Allen or Isaiah Davis behind him. Could they end up getting some touches? Absolutely. But which one will end up being the guy? And if Breece Hall stays healthy, it's not going to matter anyway. Breece Hall's getting all those touches. Arguably the toughest division in football could end up having some of the biggest question marks at the running back position this season. Except for Derrick Henry. He is in the best offense that he's been in a couple of years. It's dynamic through the air, on the ground, whether it be Lamar Jackson or now Derrick Henry. He should score a ton of touchdowns, even if for some reason he doesn't end up seeing the large amount of volume that we've become accustomed to while he was in Tennessee. And while Keaton Mitchell could see some time later in the year, he's still working his way back from injury, and I wouldn't count on him just yet. Zach Moss is a guy that I'm not against drafting, but I don't necessarily think he's going to give you better production than what we saw from Joe Mixon during his time in Cincinnati. Keep an eye on him and where his ADP ends up landing. He should end up being the starter, but also don't be surprised if Chase Brown ends up seeing quite a few touches as well. Nick Chubb and Jerome Ford are both going to find their way into the draft category for me, and really the big reason why is because we really don't know how healthy Nick Chubb will be come week 1. If Nick Chubb is not going to have any restrictions week 1, then he becomes the must draft. Jerome Ford is more of a stash. If we find out that Nick Chubb is not going to be ready for week 1, Jerome Ford is going to become a must draft. Nick Chubb will stay in the draft category because while I would love to have him on my team, I can't use a high pick on him not knowing when he'll come back. Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren could be set up for a super successful season, and that's why they're both listed as drafts. Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren could be set up for absolute failure because their offensive coordinator didn't even know how to use a top 10 pick and one of the most dynamic running backs in the NFL, Bijan Robinson, last season. So while a lot of people are excited for Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, I am not nearly as excited, and there is a really good opportunity for Jaylen Warren to push Najee Harris to the side. Najee Harris had more volume last season. Jaylen Warren was way more efficient, and it wasn't even close. The AFC South is going to be super competitive this season. Joe Mixon landing with the Houston Texans. This is a great fit. You could have not asked for a better ending to the offseason for Joe Mixon than what we got here. He could be an absolute difference maker for the Houston Texans. And while their offensive line overall didn't look great last season, a lot of that was because there was some injuries to begin the year and it took a while to settle in when everybody got healthy. I do expect that offensive line to be a little bit better, but they've got weapons everywhere and one of the best young quarterbacks in the NFL. Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson in the backfield for the Colts is an absolute match made in heaven. And then you've got Michael Pittman, the game changer on the outside that literally is a threat anywhere on the field. Josh Downs in the slot, and you've added Adonai Mitchell on the outside to stretch the field. Jonathan Taylor, really the only question mark is if he stays healthy. Because if he does, he's going to produce. Travis Etienne is going to be a must-own once again this season for Jacksonville. And Doug Peterson has talked about trying to cut back on those touches a little bit this season just to keep him healthy for the entire year. And while we could just dial those touches back just a little bit, he'll still have plenty of fantasy value. Now, if you're looking for someone to stash on this team, as much as I hate to say it, because I don't think he's that good of a running back, Tank Bigsby would end up probably being the guy, even though D'Ernest Johnson took that number 2 job from him last season. Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears is definitely going to be an interesting backfield to watch this year. But the line that Tony Pollard ran behind last season with Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks and Jake Ferguson, it feels a little bit of a better scenario than what he's in right now. And don't get me wrong, I think the Titans are much improved. I agree with them putting weapons around Will Levis to see if he can be the guy. But the line isn't going to be as good as Dallas's was last year. And the quarterback isn't as good as what Dallas had last year. And the weapons are okay, but there's no CeeDee Lamb. And because of that, I just have a really hard time buying into the fact that Tony Pollard is going to be a guy that's going to pick up the efficiency that he lost last year. And for Tyjae Spears, he's going to get some touches, but they just paid Tony Pollard, so it's probably not going to be a ton. All right, let's finish up out west. For the Denver Broncos, Javonte Williams is just short of being a must-own for me this season. I think he's going to be much more efficient this year, and I think he's going to look a lot better being a full year removed from that knee injury the season prior. But who knows what Sean Payton is thinking? They still have Jaleel McLaughlin, who made an impact in the passing game at times last season. You got Samaje Perine, who was also used in the passing game, and you drafted Estime out of Notre Dame. So what's going to end up happening with those touches? And if Javonte Williams maybe gets off to a slow start, do we see his touches start to dwindle? For the Kansas City Chiefs, it's going to be Isaiah Pacheco or bust for me. He's the guy. Improved offense, especially with speed on the outside, is going to be his biggest friend to finding lanes this season. And we know he runs just as hard, if not harder, than any other running back in the NFL. But it's Pacheco or bust. CEH, he's a decent backup. He's not a starter. We've learned by now there's no reason for us to gamble on a roster spot for a guy that, even if he has to start in place of Pacheco, probably isn't going to do a whole lot. For the Las Vegas Raiders, I'm being very careful with Zamir White. Was he good over the final few games of the season last year? Absolutely, but that is a really small sample size for us to gamble on. And I'll dive into Zamir White a lot more this offseason. But Alexander Mattison, if he can get back to running the way he did in Minnesota when he was tag teaming the backfield with Dalvin Cook, he could end up being a problem for Zamir White and potentially taking that job. And for the Los Angeles Chargers, there's a bunch of hopes, dreams, and what ifs in that backfield right now. They used their first pick on an offensive tackle. I told you all it was going to happen. And we know Jim Harbaugh loves to run the football. There's going to be a running back getting some significant touches this season. But who is it going to be? Does J.K. Dobbins stay healthy for the first time in forever? Does Gus Edwards end up getting back to being an efficiency monster like he was in his early days in Baltimore? And what about Kamani Vidal? He might be one of my favorite sleeper running backs this year. That is a guy that absolutely could end up stealing the starting job this season and being a true winner. In redraft leagues, I'm going to beg you to just pick one of these guys. And in redraft, it's going to be Edwards or it's going to be Vidal. If you end up playing in a best ball league, I would take a stab on two of these guys. And I would stab at Vidal and J.K. Dobbins, since if he would be healthy, he would have a much larger upside. And if you play in a dynasty league, it's absolutely Vidal, and there's just no arguing that. But Headliner Nation, in the past, people have told me in the comments that this is by far one of the most helpful videos that we do during the offseason, because people need to know about the depth charts at the running back position, given how frequently guys come on and off the field. So if you appreciated the video, make sure you hit that like button for me, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and turn on those bell notifications. So anytime we go live or drop new content, you'll know about it right away. But for now, Headliner Nation, I'm gonna get out of here. Peace out, stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.